If you ask me what the hardest part of putting together a speech is, I have to be honest that I wouldn't have thought it would be researching your speech. What I've discovered over the years of teaching, and it sounds like it's just kind of gotten worse over the years. When I used to put together information for doing a speech or writing a paper or anything along that line, I love doing the research. I love looking into parts of the topic that I didn't know a lot about and then learning more about it and then delivering whatever the speech or the paper or whatever it is based on that topic, now armed with information that I didn't have before. One of the things I'm starting to notice these days is when I explain what you have to do in order to put together a speech, like you have to research your topic, you need to come up with information that's significant and kind of like you didn't have before. The problem with that is a lot of people tend to choose what I'd call to be bad topics, such as choosing something that you already know everything about. Like, say you're a big soccer player, love playing soccer, and you know all the teams, um, soccer matches going back, decades. Well, the only problem with that is it's because you know all this information already. You think you don't have to do a lot of research, and people try to get away with that. Basically, because they really don't want to put in the work in order to make something like that actually happen. So, I'm going to talk to you now about the idea of research and what kind of research you should be doing whenever you're putting together a speech. Now, keep in mind the positive of this is you can take the same information and apply it to an English class. You can apply it to a history paper. All sorts of aspects and sorts of things you can rely on that can serve you really, really well. Ignoring this kind of information really doesn't lead you to the best that your abilities possibly could. So let's talk about research. Now, first off, what's really important when we're talking about research is there's two different kinds of research. There's primary sources, which is like the original information itself, and then there's secondary sources, which is generally analysis about first-person sources or primary sources that you kind of use in order to come up to the same conclusions that you would have if you just had primary sources, but doesn't always get you that, and so therefore you have to do more and more of that kind of research in order to, simplify the idea of how you got to the information that you were supposed to get. So let's say I want to do research on a particular topic that I'm going to do. Where would I find that information? Well, first off, a library used to be the place where you always went before. Uh, Surprisingly, or kind of sad if you think about it, not as many students go to the library. I remember actually taking a class to the library and they couldn't tell me where it was. So I had to actually draw a diagram to show them where the library was, which that's a pretty scary concept if you think about it. Other places you can find information are databases, periodicals. In case you don't know what a periodical is, it's a magazine. And so once you've got this information that you actually need, what's really important is to make sure that the journal or the periodical or whatever you're actually looking up has peer-reviewed information, which basically means that other scholars have looked at the information and are somewhat verifying the information to say, hey, this is good info, and so it should be trusted. A couple of places I generally criticize whenever they end up becoming as part of your sources in a speech or a paper, and that's, well, Google for one. A lot of people don't seem to understand the concept of what Google is. Google is not a source. If I ever heard somebody say, I got this information from Google, that means they didn't do any work. Google is a search engine. And so if you found something through a search engine, that's fine, but then you still have to source that particular material. One of the other sources that I generally recommend you kind of stay away from or use it in a different way, and I'll explain that in a second, is like Wikipedia's. So say I'm looking up something on horses, and so I go to a Wikipedia for horses and it'll tell me all sorts of information about it. One of the problems with that is you don't know that you can actually trust the information, because remember, the sources of most of this information is from other people like you, other people like me, people who are just generally know something about a topic, and then they put the information that they actually know. So this should never actually be used as your source material. However, what you could do, like say I found an article on Wikipedia about horses, at the very bottom of it is a whole bunch of information on where this information came from. And so using those same sources, you can then do the same research that they should have done, except now you're no longer reliant on the belief that people are giving you good information. So there are a couple of other sources you can actually use when you're doing research. Not all of it has to come from some other place. You can actually do research on your own, and that's done through like surveys, where you ask a whole bunch of different questions of someone about a particular topic, usually because they're an expert in that field, or at least they know enough information to be trusted for whatever they're actually going to say. The other kind of source that you can kind of build yourself are interviews. So if you're talking about like the world's or the nation's oldest person, and you manage to get an interview with that particular individual, then that's the kind of research that works really, really well in your favor.